You know that feeling when you're lying in bed at night, exhausted, but your mind won't stop. Not just thinking, racing, replaying conversations from 3 days ago, imagining arguments that haven't happened yet, analyzing your own reactions like you're watching yourself from the outside, wondering why you said that thing, why you felt that way, why you can't just be normal about it. And underneath all of it, there's this low hum of anxiety that never really goes away. It's not panic. It's quieter than that. It's more like a constant background noise in your chest. This persistent sense that something is wrong, that you're doing life incorrectly somehow, that everyone else figured out how to just exist without this exhausting internal commentary, and you're the only one still stuck in the observation room, watching yourself fail the test over and over. Here's what nobody tells you about that feeling. It's not a chemical imbalance. It's not a character flaw. It's not because you're too sensitive or too in your head, or because you need to meditate more or think more positively, or whatever else the internet suggests on a Tuesday afternoon when you're searching for answers at 2 in the morning. What if I told you that the anxiety, the overthinking, the constant sense of being at war with yourself, what if all of that is actually a symptom of something much deeper, something most people never name, but almost everyone feels? You're fighting yourself, not metaphorically, not in some vague self-help way. You are literally, psychologically, spending your energy in a civil war between who you actually are and who you think you're supposed to be. And that war, that constant battle, that's where the anxiety lives. That's where the overthinking comes from. Because when you're divided against yourself, when you can't trust your own feelings, when every natural impulse has to be checked and rechecked against an impossible standard, your mind never rests. It can't, because rest would mean letting your guard down. And you've learned that letting your guard down means being the wrong version of yourself. Think about how much energy you spend managing your own reactions. Someone says something to you, and before you even know what you feel, you're already calculating what you should feel. Is this offensive? Should I be hurt? Am I overreacting? Am I underreacting? What would a normal person feel right now? And then you feel something, but it doesn't match the calculation. So now you're anxious about feeling the wrong thing, and you're trying to adjust your feelings in real time, like you're constantly editing a document that keeps writing itself in the wrong language. You do this with everything: your career choices, your relationships, the way you spend a Saturday. You're never just doing something, you're always watching yourself do it, grading your performance, comparing it to some invisible standard you can't quite define, but feel constantly judged by. And the exhausting part, the part that makes you want to crawl out of your own skin sometimes, is that you don't even know where that standard came from. It's just there, this voice that says you're doing it wrong, being it wrong, wanting the wrong things, feeling the wrong way. Here's the thing about that voice. You think it's protecting you. You think it's keeping you acceptable, keeping you safe, keeping you from being too much or not enough or whatever shape of wrong you're most afraid of becoming. But what it's actually doing is severing you from the only reliable guidance system. You have your own internal experience, because every time you override what you genuinely feel in favor of what you think you should feel, every time you silence an authentic response because it doesn't fit the image, you're sending yourself a message. The message is, you can't be trusted. Your real self is unacceptable. Who you naturally are is not enough. And when you live with that message long enough, it doesn't just make you anxious, it makes you a stranger to yourself. You know those moments when someone asks you what you want, just a simple question, like where do you want to eat or what do you feel like doing, and your mind goes blank, not because you don't care, but because you genuinely don't know. That's not indecisiveness, that's disconnection. You've spent so long overriding your actual preferences in favor of what seems acceptable or appropriate or convenient for everyone else, that you've lost access to the signal. The channel is still there, but it's buried under so much static, so many shoulds and supposed-tos, that you can't hear it anymore. If this is landing somewhere in your chest right now, if you're recognizing something you've felt but never quite named, just know you're not alone in this. And if you want to keep exploring this with me, go ahead and subscribe. This is the kind of conversation we have here, not fixing, not solving, just understanding the architecture of what it means to be human and caught in these invisible patterns. The psychologist Carl Rogers spent his entire career studying this split, this war between the self you are and the self you present. He called it incongruence. That's the clinical term. But what it really means is that you're living at a distance from yourself. You're performing an acceptable version of you, while the real version sits in the audience, watching, feeling increasingly like a ghost. And that distance, that gap between your authentic experience and the edited version you show the world, that's not just uncomfortable, it's destabilizing, because human beings need internal coherence. We need to feel that who we are in private matches who we are in public, that our feelings are valid, that our experience of reality is real. When that coherence breaks down, when you're constantly editing and managing and second-guessing, your nervous system doesn't know how to settle, because settling would require trust. Trust that you're okay as you are. Trust that your natural responses are acceptable. Trust that you don't have to monitor every thought and feeling like a security guard watching for threats. But you can't trust yourself when you're at war with yourself. So the anxiety persists. The overthinking continues. Because your system is trying to solve an impossible equation: how to be yourself while also being someone else. How to feel what you feel while also feeling what you should feel. How to exist authentically while meeting conditions that require you to be inauthentic. Most people spend their entire lives trying to win that war, trying to finally become the right version of themselves. The one that doesn't need editing. The one that naturally wants what they're supposed to want and feels what they're supposed to feel. But here's what Rogers understood, what his entire approach to psychology was built on. You can't win that war. You can only end it. And you end it by recognizing that the conditions, the standards, the impossible shoulds you're trying to meet, they're not real. They're not handed down from the universe. They're learned, absorbed, internalized from people who had their own conditions, their own fears, their own need for you to be a certain way so they could feel secure. Think about where you learned that your real feelings were unacceptable. It probably wasn't one dramatic moment. It was small things. A parent who couldn't handle your anger, so you learned to suppress it. A friend group where vulnerability was weakness, so you learned to hide it. A culture that rewarded productivity over presence, so you learned to distrust rest. 1,000 tiny moments where the message was clear. Who you naturally are needs adjustment. And you learned. You adjusted. You built this sophisticated internal system for monitoring and managing yourself, for catching the unacceptable parts before they showed, for maintaining the performance. But no one told you the cost. No one explained that the price of constant self-monitoring is chronic anxiety, that the price of conditional self-acceptance is never feeling truly at home in your own skin, that the price of performing an acceptable self is losing contact with your actual self, the one that knows what it wants and needs and feels without having to calculate it first. And here's where it gets heavy, where the real weight of this sits. You can't think your way out of this. You can't overthink yourself into authenticity, because the overthinking is part of the problem. It's the mind's attempt to solve a problem. The mind created this idea that you need to be someone other than who you are. But the solution isn't more analysis, more self-improvement, more strategies for managing yourself better. The solution is a kind of surrender, not giving up, not resignation, but a deep, uncomfortable recognition that maybe, possibly, the version of you that doesn't need constant editing, the one you keep trying to fix, maybe that version is not the problem. What if the anxiety you feel isn't a sign that something is wrong with you? What if it's a sign that something is wrong with the way you're relating to yourself? What if your system is trying to tell you, in the only language it has, tension, worry, sleeplessness, that low hum in your chest, that you can't keep living this divided? That authenticity isn't a luxury or a goal for people who have their lives together. It's a basic psychological need, as fundamental as food or connection. And when that need goes unmet, when you're chronically performing a self that isn't quite you, your system sounds the alarm, not because you're broken, but because you're human, and humans aren't built to live at war with themselves. Rogers used to talk about something he called the actualizing tendency. It's this idea that every living organism has an inherent drive toward growth, toward becoming more fully itself. A seed doesn't try to become a better seed, it just grows into the tree it already is. But humans, we're different. We're the only organism that can override that drive, that can decide our natural direction is wrong and try to grow into something we're not. And we do it because we learn early that acceptance is conditional, that love comes with terms, that belonging requires editing. So we edit, and we lose ourselves in the editing. And then we wonder why we feel anxious, why we can't stop overthinking, why nothing feels quite right even when externally everything is fine. It's because internally, you're not fine. You're exhausted from maintaining a performance that was never supposed to be permanent. You're tired of being at war with yourself and some part of you. The part that keeps you up at night. The part that won't let you rest, that part is trying to tell you something. If you're still with me, if this is making sense in a way that feels almost uncomfortable because it's too close to something you've been avoiding, I want you to do something. Leave a comment, not with a solution or a success story, just with a word, a feeling, a phrase that captures where you are right now. Because this conversation doesn't work if it's just me talking. It only works when we acknowledge we're in this together. When we stop pretending we're the only one feeling this way. Here's what nobody prepares you for. The path back to yourself. The way out of this chronic anxiety and overthinking. It doesn't look like you think it will. It's not about becoming more disciplined or more mindful or more anything. It's about becoming less defended, less edited, less concerned with managing every feeling and reaction to maintain an acceptable image. It's about learning, slowly and often painfully, to let yourself be known first to yourself, and then, gradually, to others. Not the curated version, not the one you've decided is acceptable, the one that exists before you start editing, before the shoulds kick in, before the anxiety tells you that your natural state needs adjustment. And that's terrifying, because you've spent so long believing that your unedited self is exactly what needs to be hidden. You've internalized the message that your real feelings are too much or not enough, that your authentic preferences are selfish or wrong, that who you naturally are would be rejected if anyone really saw it. So you've built this fortress of management and monitoring, and the idea of lowering those defenses, even just for yourself, feels like exposing yourself to certain judgment. But here's what Rogers found in decades of working with people. When someone is given the experience of unconditional positive regard, when they're accepted without conditions, without having to perform or edit or earn that acceptance, something shifts. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually. They start to relax the war. They start to trust their own experience again. They begin to distinguish between the feelings that are actually theirs and the feelings they think they should have. And as that happens, as they move toward congruence, toward alignment between their real self and their presented self, the anxiety decreases, not because the external circumstances change, but because the internal conflict resolves. You stop fighting yourself, and when you stop fighting yourself, there's nothing left to be anxious about. That sounds simple. It's not, because unconditional positive regard is rare. Most of us didn't grow up with it. Most of us learned early that acceptance comes with conditions, that love is something you earn by being the right version of yourself. And even now, as adults, we're surrounded by messages that reinforce that learning. Be more productive, be more positive, be less sensitive, be more confident, be different than you are, and then you'll be acceptable. So you can't wait for the world to give you permission to be yourself. You have to give yourself that permission. And that's not a what-time decision. It's a practice, a daily, moment-by-moment choice to notice when you're overriding your authentic experience, when you're editing yourself to meet some invisible standard, when you're performing instead of being, and then, slowly, carefully, to try something different, to let the real response exist, even just internally, to acknowledge what you actually feel instead of what you should feel, to trust, just a little bit, that your experience is valid even if it doesn't match the script. This isn't about suddenly being brutally honest with everyone or sharing every unfiltered thought. It's not about rejecting all social norms or deciding everyone else is wrong about you. It's about rebuilding trust with yourself, It's about restoring the internal coherence that anxiety feeds on when it's absent. It's about ending the civil war inside you. And yes, that's vulnerable. It means you might discover some relationships are built on performance, not the person. It means you might disappoint people who prefer the edited version of you. It might even feel disorienting at first, because when you've been performing for so long, you forget what being feels like. But the alternative is staying chronically anxious, stuck in overthinking, maintaining a version of yourself that was never meant to be permanent. If this resonates, take that seriously. The root cause of your anxiety isn't some hidden flaw or unfixable darkness. It's incongruence, the exhausting attempt to be someone other than who you are. And overthinking isn't separate from that. It's what happens when you can't trust your own experience, when every feeling needs approval before you're allowed to have it. You've been taught the answer is better control, stronger discipline, tighter management. But what if the answer is the opposite? What if it's learning, slowly, to stop managing yourself so relentlessly, to listen instead of override, to let yourself be imperfect and real? Rogers believed psychological health depended on congruence, alignment between your inner experience and your outer expression. Not perfect transparency, but enough honesty that you're not a stranger to yourself, enough authenticity that you can recognize yourself in your own life. When that alignment begins, anxiety loses its ground, not because you've fixed yourself, but because you've stopped treating yourself like something broken, not because you've become the right version of yourself, but because you've stopped chasing conditions that were never truly yours. You were never broken. You were taught that who you are isn't enough. So you've been trying to earn acceptance ever since, meeting standards that keep shifting. But the problem was never you. It was the conditions. So what now? You don't need a dramatic transformation. Just start noticing. Notice when you override yourself. Notice when you're performing. Notice when a should tells you to be someone else. And in those moments, simply see it. No judgment, no fixing, just awareness. Because awareness is how the war ends. Not through force, but through small moments of choosing to stop fighting yourself, of putting the weapons down and allowing yourself to exist without constant correction. If you do that often enough, something shifts. The anxiety softens. The overthinking quiets. Not because you've solved yourself, but because you've stopped treating yourself like a problem. You've started treating yourself like a person, someone who learned to fight themselves in order to survive, and who may now be ready to stop. You don't have to live at war with yourself. That pattern was learned, and what was learned can be unlearned, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. You can stop editing yourself long enough to simply be, and when you do, when you finally allow the real version to exist, messy, inconvenient, human, you'll find what you were searching for in all that anxiety and analysis. You'll find yourself.